Great. And it looks like before we get started, it looks like we have somewhat of an international or maybe national community here. So I'm curious where everyone is located. Maybe if you want to share in the chat area where you are, that would be great. Welcome, Rhiannon, Patricia, Linda. Yeah, truly national and international. And as you probably know, Glen is in Australia, Aphasia. I hope you're having a wonderful time in Bali. Uh, fantastic. Yeah. And Sunny, who is here in the room, Sunny O'Neill, will be your host for these sessions, really supporting Glen and supporting all of you have a great experience. Just wanted to briefly introduce Glen myself, as I believe I was the one who invited him to our center. And the reason that I did that was because I really found him to be somewhat a rare and precious gem, as people would say, about the Dharma. And, they say Dharma is so rare, and to meet a qualified teacher is so rare. And what I found through my experience is that Glen not only had deep meditative experience, really just walking the path and developing those skills and realizations, but also had this profound ability to teach them in a very simple, straightforward, and accessible manner to others. And so for those also who had been to Glen's teachings previously, they totally understood what I was talking about. And so collectively, we really decide to invite Glen. So thank you so much, Glen, for coming to teach us. We're thrilled about that, and how wonderful that it's a course on such a important and somewhat overlooked topic of shamatha. So much appreciation. And without further ado, I'll pass things over to you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Firstly, I'd like to welcome everyone here to this 6-week program on shamatha practice, a practice where we are developing mindfulness. In this 6-week program, each of the sessions will be 90 minutes long, and it'll be every Tuesday now for the next 6 weeks, 7 till 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, although I believe some of you are not in that time zone like myself. I'm actually in Australia at the moment, so here it's actually Wednesday morning. Now, each session that we'll be doing will have a similar format, and that is we'll typically begin with a meditation. Then we'll have a presentation of the material for that session, another guided meditation, and then at the end of the session, time for question answer. Now, for the question answer, you've got two choices. You can either put your questions in the chat, and then Sunny will read out your question at the end of the session. And you can put the question in the chat at any time during the session, or if you prefer at the end of the session, when we get to the question answer, if you like, you can switch on your mic and webcam and ask the question directly. So you have these two choices for questions. Now, in terms of the subject schedule for the next 6 weeks, this session will be basically an introduction into this shamatha practice. And then the following 3 Tuesdays, we'll be looking at 3 variations of the mindfulness of breathing practice, the full body practice, focusing on the abdomen, and then focusing at the nostrils. And then in the 5th session, we'll be looking at how we can use the Shavasana posture, the posture of lying down for meditation, particularly to help us to cultivate some relaxation in meditation. And then in the last session, we'll be looking at how we can integrate this shamatha practice into daily life. The recommended reading for this program is Attention Evolution by Alan Wallace. It's an excellent book on this shamatha practice. I highly recommend that book. The materials for this program, we've got a number of charts that you would have got access to by now. There's 3 charts, a color diagram, a chart, and then another diagram with some description. We'll be using those in conjunction with explaining the stages of progress in this practice. And we'll be using these charts in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th session in this program. So if you'd like to print those out, you may find them helpful, although most of the material on those charts will be including in the slides as we go as well. That brings us to this evening's session, then the session 1, where we'll just give a little introduction into the Shamatha practice. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in the session this evening. We'll start with a meditation, and in the meditation, we'll simply be settling our body and mind, and then setting a good motivation, not only for this session, but for this entire program. Following that, we'll begin with an introduction into what is shamatha, and then why is this shamatha practice so important? Then we'll be looking at how to train in shamatha, what are the various components in the shamatha training. And in this evening's session, we're looking at how to prepare body, speech, and mind, to really prepare ourselves well at the beginning of every meditation session. And then we'll be doing a guided meditation on that. And then after that meditation, we'll be briefly introducing the qualities that we are cultivating in this shamatha practice. And then finally, at the end of the session, we'll have plenty of time for question and answer. Let's dive straight in to initial meditation of just settling our body and mind, and then setting a good motivation. And what I'll be doing for each of the guided meditations during this program, I'll be switching off my webcam, so not as to distract you, for those of you particularly meditating with eyes open. So if you'd like to find a nice comfortable posture, let's begin. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body and simply become aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face, and softening and relaxing all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing it to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then with each out-breath, letting go of any thoughts that may have arisen, happily releasing them. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest, in the present moment. Releasing all activities of the mind and just rest. Resting in that stillness. Allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And now think about your motivation for attending this program. And then try to set as an expansive motivation as possible for attending this Shamatha practice program. And if possible, try to include others in your motivation. That you're not only doing this for your own benefit, but you're doing it so you can be of more benefit to those around you. And for any of you who are following the Mahayana path, then you can cultivate the motivation or aspiration of bodhicitta. the aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others. And then keeping your motivation in mind, we can slowly end this meditation and begin our discussions together here this evening. And let's begin those discussions with understanding what is shamatha. When we say shamatha practice, what do we mean by this word shamatha? Shamatha is a Sanskrit term, and we can break this term into two parts. The first part, shama, means calm, a mind that is calm, not discursive, not full of thoughts. And ta means to remain or abide. And so often shamatha is translated into English as calm abiding, or in Tibetan it's called shinai practice. And so here we're talking about a practice of not only having a calm mind, but a mind that is abiding single-pointedly on an object. And so shamatha is the practice of cultivating a calm, clear, and focused mind. It's a concentration practice. And in that practice, mindfulness is the main tool we use. Through developing mindfulness, we improve our attention skills. We gain better concentration. And we'll talk more about this tool we use called mindfulness in the next session. We'll give a lot of detail about this mindfulness, because I think there is some confusion in the modern world about what does mindfulness mean. And we'll look at that in detail in the next session next week. In this context, there's another Sanskrit term that's often used, and that is samadhi. And samadhi, the first part of the word sam prefix means totally, and di means to place. So samadhi is about totally placing the mind. And it's as often translated into English as concentration. So samadhi, we can have many levels of concentration or samadhi. The level of samadhi that we are cultivating here in this practice is called shamatha. And this is the level of concentration that is emphasized in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions. Then above that, we have what's called 4 levels of jhana. And these are ones that are more emphasized in the Theravada Buddhist tradition. So often in these Buddhist traditions, when they talk about doing concentration or samadhi practice, they wouldn't say we're doing shamatha practice. Rather, they'd say we're doing jhana practice. Same practice. And then there are even higher levels of concentration called samapati. But in this context here, that's not so relevant. So here we're looking at a level of concentration called shamatha, single-pointed concentration. Why is this shamatha practice important? Why is it important to develop our attention skills? And here we can begin with a quote from the recommended reading for this program, Attention Evolution by Alan Wallace. And he says, "Few things affect our lives more than our faculty of attention. If we can't focus our attention, we can't do anything well. We can't study, listen, converse with others, work, play, or even sleep well when our attention is impaired." And then another quote from great Indian Buddhist master Shantideva from the 8th century, he says, "Those with a distracted mind are trapped in the jaws of the mental afflictions." So if we don't have very good attention skills, it means we're more predisposed to mental afflictions such as agitation and anxiety and craving and frustration and so forth. And if we have poor attention skills, as Alan Wallace mentioned, then we're not very effective in anything we do. And this often leads to a lot of agitation and stress. much more mental imbalance, again, much more predisposed to get caught up in craving and attachment and frustration and so forth. And so we end up being the slaves of our own mind. We often get caught up and tormented and overwhelmed by our thoughts, emotions, memories, and so forth. And then we're not really enjoying the simple pleasures in life as much as we could because of these agitated states of mind. And also that often translates into sleep problems and even physical health problems. I think a lot of modern day physical health problems are because of this agitated state of mind that is manifesting as all sorts of problems, physical problems in the body. So if we can engage in this shamatha practice, then we're going to find we'll be much more effective in everything we do, much less agitation and stress, much better mental balance. Instead of being the slaves of our mind, we'll become the masters of our own mind, and we'll start to enjoy the simple pleasures in life much more. And then also we'll probably find a better quality of sleep and maybe even some physical health benefits as well. But also, shamatha practice is very important in the pursuit of happiness. It's an integral part of that pursuit. And here we have a quote from His Holiness Dalai Lama, who says, "I believe that the very purpose of our life is to seek happiness. Whether one believes in religion or not, whether one believes in this religion or that religion, we are all seeking something better in life. So I think the very motion of our life is towards happiness." But when we talk about striving for happiness, we need to understand that there are at least two types of happiness. There is what's called temporal happiness, which is simply another name for our pleasurable experiences. So this is what's called a stimulus-based happiness. We have a certain stimulus, we have a pleasurable experience. And therefore, it's often called conditioned happiness. Certain conditions come together, certain stimulus, we have pleasant experience. And these pleasant experiences, therefore, by nature, are transient, meaning that when the stimulus finishes, the pleasant experience finishes. And hence, they're unsustainable. As soon as the stimulus finishes, the pleasant experience is gone. But they're also unreliable because they require a stimulus, a certain stimulus. Without that stimulus, then we don't have pleasant experiences. We can't just click our fingers and have a pleasant experience whenever we want one. And if we look at our pleasant experiences more closely, we'll come to see they're not really even in the nature of happiness. Because if our pleasant experiences were in the nature of happiness, it would mean that the more we engaged in them, the more happy we should become. But we know from our own experience that if we overindulge in our pleasant experiences, not only don't they make us more happy, they often induce a lot of unnecessary suffering. Classic example, eating too much of our favorite dessert, spending too long out in nice warm sunshine. So this type of happiness, this temporal happiness, is all about what we can get from the world. Whereas we have a second type of happiness called genuine happiness, this state of inner well-being, a state of well-being that does not require any particular stimulus to be present. So this is not a stimulus-based happiness. And therefore it's called unconditioned happiness. We don't need certain conditions to come together to be in this state. And so therefore this type of happiness by nature is stable, it is sustainable, it's reliable, and it is in the nature of happiness. And this type of happiness is more about what we can bring to the world. Now, unfortunately, we tend to conflate the two. We tend to mistake pleasure for happiness, that we hope our pleasurable experiences are going to give us some sort of lasting, genuine happiness, which means that that leads to attachment to pleasure. We try and grab it and hold on to it, hoping that it's going to satisfy us and fulfill us and last. But unfortunately, together with that craving and attachment for pleasurable experiences comes worry and anxiety about not getting it, not getting enough of it, or potentially losing it. And then often a lot of frustration when we don't get it, overindulging when we do get it, and then often a lot of dissatisfaction and disappointment when things don't live up to our expectations. And then we often feel the reason I am not happy is I just didn't get enough of that thing. So we end up with more craving, more attachment. So we're in this sort of loop and we never are fully satisfied. And then with that craving and attachment, we actually end up not enjoying the things we used to enjoy. And we know this well from our own experience. If there's something we enjoy, but we get it too often, it doesn't take too many times of getting that thing where our craving and attachment then says, well, sorry, that's not good enough anymore because I need something bigger, better, and different. So craving and attachment is never satisfied. Now, if we don't mistake pleasure for genuine happiness, understanding there are two types of happiness, then we can strive for that genuine happiness, that inner well-being, and at the same time, enjoy our pleasurable experiences more fully, because we'll be letting go of that craving and attachment, understanding they're never going to fulfill and satisfy us. But here, what we need to understand, it's not a choice between the two types of happiness. It's not we either go for pleasure or we go for genuine happiness. And unfortunately, sometimes people get the wrong understanding. That's what this Buddhist spiritual path is about. That in the pursuit of genuine happiness, we need to give up our pleasure. And that unfortunately comes from a misunderstanding about a word called renunciation. That's often presented as the entry point into the Buddhist spiritual path. We need to have renunciation. And so people sometimes mistakenly think, well, renunciation means I need to give up all my pleasure and wealth and all those sorts of things, because isn't that what Buddhism is saying? And that's not the case. In fact, renunciation is often presented as giving up the 8 worldly concerns, which are four pairs of things. One thing we want and one thing we're trying to avoid. The ones on the left seem to be happiness, source of happiness, and ones on the right seems to be the source of suffering. So first pair is gain and loss. We feel like if we have more, gain is material wealth and possessions and so forth. We feel like the more of that we have, the more happy we'll be. And if we lose those things, that will definitely suffer. So we try to avoid losing those things. But we tend, again, to equate pleasure with happiness. So we try and get as much pleasure as possible because we believe we'll be more happy. And then pain seems to be suffering. So we try to avoid any situations, any painful situations. But not only do we feel that's important for happiness, we often feel that it's important for our happiness what people are saying about us. So we put a lot of effort in trying to get praise from others because we believe then we'll be more happy. And blame, when we receive that, we feel like we're suffer. So we put a lot of effort trying to avoid getting blamed for things. But not only that, but we feel like it's important for our happiness, not only what people are saying about us, but what people are thinking about us. So we try to do as much as we can to get a good reputation, that people respect us, admire us, look up to us, and so forth. And if we have a bad reputation, then we're going to definitely suffer. So we try to avoid that at all costs. So here, renunciation is not about giving up those things on the left, gain, pleasure, praise, good reputation. We're not giving up the 8 worldly things. We're giving up the 8 worldly concerns. And here the word concern means believing the things on the left are the source of happiness and the things on the right are the source of suffering. So therefore, renunciation is about giving up an unhealthy attitude to those things. Whether or not we have a lot of money and pleasure and praise and good reputation is not the important thing. The important thing is our attitude towards those. And if we have craving and attachment for them, we're just going to suffer. And so therefore, renunciation is give up that unhealthy attitude, understanding they are not the source of our happiness. But even understanding renunciation in that way, renunciation actually is not a good translation. The original Sanskrit term here is ni sarana. The prefix ni means out of, away from. Sarana means to move. So ni sarana is the wish or aspiration to move out of, away from suffering, to liberation from suffering. So actually the term means the aspiration for liberation from suffering. This is actually what the word renunciation means from the original Sanskrit. And similarly, we see that in the Tibetan here, ne chung, definite emergence, the mind that definitely wants to emerge from suffering to happiness. So that's renunciation. Then what do we mean by genuine happiness or inner well-being? Here we have a quote from the Buddha. And how do we accomplish that? He says, find out what really constitutes true well-being, and based on this understanding, pursue it. Now, this genuine happiness, this true well-being, this inner well-being, is presented within the Theravada Buddhist traditions as achieving the goal of nirvana. Whereas in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, it's often presented as achieving this goal of enlightenment. How to pursue the goal of nirvana in the Theravada Buddhist traditions, that state of genuine happiness, inner well-being, is normally presented as the Noble Eightfold Path, whereas how to pursue the goal of enlightenment in Mahayana, the presentation of the six perfections. But what we find is that within both of those presentations, they come down to the same three core areas of practice. That if we want to pursue genuine happiness, inner well-being, three core areas of practice of ethics, concentration, and wisdom, called the three higher trainings. So let's see briefly how the Noble Eightfold Path and six perfections are condensed to the three higher trainings. Within that Noble Eightfold Path, what is called right speech, right action, right livelihood is ethics, meaning avoiding harmful behavior. Right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration is condensed as concentration, and right view and right thought is condensed as wisdom. In the six perfections, in the Mahayana traditions, the first three perfections of generosity, ethics, patience are subsumed as ethics. Then the fifth one is concentration, the sixth is wisdom. The fourth one of joyous effort is something we need to apply to all three areas of practice. So therefore, the three core areas of practice in all Buddhist traditions in the pursuit of genuine happiness is ethics, concentration, and wisdom. And we see this also in the Shamatha chart, that color chart that we'll be using later in this program. At the top of that chart in the right, we see the meditator riding on the elephant of the mind, and in their right hand is a sword. That's the sword of wisdom. So this is the wisdom or vipassana practice, as it's often referred to. And the writing there says, the root of samsara is cut by the union of shamatha and vipassana observing emptiness. So therefore here in the Mahayana Buddhist traditions, we have the basis is that ethics. Then we engage in the concentration practice, which is this shamatha practice that is the topic of this program. And then on that basis, we engage in the wisdom or vipassana practice. Now, if we want that vipassana practice to be able to get us to a direct insight into nature of reality, then we need a very stable, clear, focused mind. We need the mind of shamatha. Without the mind of shamatha, we're not going to be able to realize nature of reality, realize this emptiness, and thereby overcome mental afflictions and suffering and achieve this state of genuine happiness. So the practice of shamatha is crucial in the pursuit of genuine happiness. It's the basis for vipassana practice. So let's now look at how to train in shamatha, the elements of the practice that we're going to be looking at in this program. We often talk about what's called the prerequisites for shamatha, meaning how to set up our life in such a way to support this practice. We'll be looking at that in the last session in this program, session 6. In terms of the actual practice, any practice has two parts, the meditation and then integrating that into daily life. And here, in terms of meditation, any meditation, again, has two parts. There's the preparation at the beginning of the meditation and then the actual meditation. And so here, that's the topic for this session, is the preparation. How to prepare our body, speech, and mind well at the beginning of every meditation session so that we can effectively engage in shamatha practice or any other type of meditation practice. Now, in terms of the actual shamatha meditation, there are 4 topics that we're going to look at in this program. The first is what qualities do we cultivate in the shamatha training? And we'll be looking at that towards the end of this session. And then next week in session 2, we'll be looking at what sorts of objects should we focus on in this practice? Because this practice is about developing single-pointed concentration. So what objects should we focus on to develop that concentration? But then also, what tools do we use in this practice? Mindfulness being the main tool, we'll be looking at that also in the next session. And then in session 3, what sorts of faults can come up in this training and how do we overcome those faults? And then we'll be in the last session, session 6, we'll be looking at how to integrate this shamatha practice into our daily life so we can really make some progress as well. And then also using those materials, those charts and color diagrams in session 3, 4, and 5, we'll be looking at the stages of progress that we go through in this shamatha training, the shamatha practice. So these are the main topics we'll be looking at over the next 6 weeks. So let's now then go to the topic for this session, and that is preparing body, speech, and mind, meaning how to prepare ourselves well at the beginning of each meditation session. And this is very important because often people, when they meditate, they just sit down and start meditating. And then things don't go very well in their meditation practice. And they're wondering, why is things so difficult in meditation? That's a little bit like if we want to run a 100-meter sprint without warming up. I think it's not going to go very well. We might actually injure ourselves. So similarly here, it's very important to prepare body, speech, and mind well at the beginning of every meditation session so that we put ourselves in an optimal state to most effectively engage in the main meditation practice. In terms of preparing the body, this is all about posture. And so here we can say we're setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. So there's what's called the 7-point meditation posture that is often described as things we need to check in terms of establishing a good posture. So let's briefly go through those now. The first is legs. What to do with the legs for meditation? And the optimal position is what's called the full lotus, where you put one foot on the opposite thighs. But I think for most of us in the modern world, we're not flexible enough to do full lotus. So many of us simply sit cross-legged when we meditate. And that's fine. But often when we do that, we find that we find it difficult to keep the back nice and straight because still we're not very flexible in the knees and the hips. So therefore, if we are sitting cross-legged and we're very inflexible in the knees and the hips, it's important to put more cushions, to sit on more cushions so that our back is naturally straight, that we're not straining to keep the back straight. Now, some people find that sitting cross-legged doesn't work because maybe they've got damaged knee or back problems or so forth. Then you can use a meditation stool instead, where you tuck your legs underneath the stool. So then you don't cross the legs, so that can help. But sometimes people, again, have back problems and finding sitting on a cushion is a lot of pain in the back. So then we can use a chair to help support the back. But sometimes even people have problems sitting in a chair, there's still a lot of pain. Then we, as an alternative to that, we can use the Shavasana posture where we're lying flat down on our back to meditate. And we'll be looking at how to use that posture as a valid meditation posture in session 5, particularly helpful for relaxation if we have a lot of tightness, tension in the body and the mind. And so we'll be looking at that posture in detail in session 5 in this program. So that's the legs. Hands. What to do with the hands? In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, what's often recommended is you put the right palm in the left, thumbs touching, and then rest them in your lap. And that is symbolizing, the left hand is symbolizing wisdom, the right compassion, thumbs touching, symbolizing we're practicing wisdom and compassion together. But if you find that uncomfortable, you can simply rest the hands on your knees. That's fine. Back. What to do with the back? again, we need to keep the back nice and straight, because if we're sort of hunching over, then we're just going to fall into a lot of dullness, drowsiness, and sleepiness. And again, if we're very inflexible in the hips, to keep the back straight, you may find you're straining to keep the back straight. Then just keep adding more cushions that you're sitting on, so that your back is naturally straight. Shoulders level and relaxed, head slightly tilted forward so that you're looking sort of slightly downward. If it's too high, you may get agitated. If it's too low, you'll fall into dullness or drowsiness. Then what to do with the eyes? The general recommendation is to have the eyes at least slightly open when we meditate, because if we have them closed, one is now eyes closed, we have a mental association with sleep. So when we close our eyes, we associate that with sleep, we get very drowsy. But so therefore we'll find that if we close our eyes, we're going to start to fall into dullness or drowsiness. But here, as a beginner, we can be very flexible. Now, if we're the sort of person who normally gets very agitated, then having the eyes slightly open, letting in a bit of light in, we may find we just get even more agitated. Then we can have the eyes slightly closed. Whereas if we're the sort of person who tends to be more dull than agitated, then meditating with eyes closed, we're just going to fall into dullness. So then for you, very much recommended to have the eyes open. And we can even have the eyes naturally open as well. There are other shamatha practices where we're particularly observing the mind, where it's very much recommended to have the eyes open. But here in this program where we're focusing on the breath, you can experiment with eyes open or closed and see which works best for you. If closed, you're going drowsy, then eyes open. If your eyes are open and you're getting really agitated, then you can close eyes. So you can experiment with that in this program. And then jaw, keep it nice and relaxed. And often in the meditation, it says, instructions, it says to even put the tip of your tongue on your upper palate. And that's for reducing saliva. Sometimes people find they're building up a lot of saliva and they're constantly swallowing, which is a distraction. Then tip of the tongue on the upper palate can help reduce that. If you have no problems with producing saliva, then just ignore that advice. In this 7-point posture, the two key elements here is back straight, body relaxed. So we see that in settling the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, vigilance. Vigilance means to keep it back straight, same time, body completely relaxed. Stillness means that once we've established a good posture, then to keep the body as still as possible in the meditation, avoiding any unnecessary movement. You know, often when we have a little bit of an itch or scratch, we're sort of doing this all the time and constantly fidgeting and moving. If we do that during the meditation, that's just going to distract us. So once we've established a good posture, keep the body as still as possible. So that's preparing the body. Let's go to preparing the speech. And speech here doesn't mean verbal speech. It means inner speech, mental chit chat. And sometimes you may find that when you come into meditation, your mind is very agitated and disturbed, and particularly a lot of negativity in the mind. Then what we can do to help let go of that is here, begin with a little breathing exercise. And some traditions talk about taking 3 deep breaths. Some traditions talk about counting 21 breaths. And in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition here, they often talk about this 9-round breathing exercise, which can be a very complex exercise involving a lot of visualizations and channels and so forth. But regardless of whether it's taking 3 deep breaths, counting 21 breaths, or 9-round breathing exercise, all of these breathing exercises at this point here as part of the preparation serve the same purpose. And that is to, by focusing on a breathing exercise, we can let go of all that negativity in the mind and bring the mind into a neutral state. Because when we meditate, we want to be the mind in a positive state. But if we come into the meditation with a lot of agitation, negativity, it's very hard from that state to put it into a positive state. So as an intermediate step, we just let go of that negativity by focusing on a little breathing exercise, bring the mind in a neutral state, and then from there we can develop a positive motivation. And then it's also part of preparing the speech is to simply allow the breathing to start to settle into its natural rhythm. But here we're not talking about making the breathing rhythmic. Sometimes people feel like in meditation, they have to make their breathing rhythmic. They have to make it somehow subtle or so forth. And then they try to force the breath in a certain way. We often see that in meditation. People mistakenly believe I have to make my breathing more and more subtle. So they push it that way in meditation. And then suddenly in the middle of the meditation, they go, because they're not breathing enough. So that's a sure sign that we're forcing or controlling the breath. So we don't want to do that here. So allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm simply means to step back and allow the breathing to settle naturally. And as the breathing starts to settle down, you'll find that your mind, closely related to that, will start to settle down as well. So that will help to segue into actually preparing the mind. And in preparing the mind, we set positive motivation. And also, it's very helpful in any meditation practice that as part of that positive motivation, to try to include others in our motivation. Because if we have a good motivation, but it's only based on ourselves, for example, I'm doing this practice to develop myself to become a better person, that's good. But on days where things are going a little bit difficult, you may find that because it's only a motivation based on ourselves, it's easier to just give up when things get difficult. Whereas if we've included others in our motivation, we're doing this for others as well, then we're more likely to persevere in the face of difficulty. And it's a much more powerful motivation if we include others. As I mentioned earlier, those of you who are already maybe following Tibetan Buddhism or Mahayana path, then the motivation that we are trying to cultivate at the beginning of meditation is this motivation of bodhicitta, the aspiration for full awakening for the benefit of others. But if we're not following a Mahayana path or Tibetan Buddhism in particular, then at least try to make that motivation as expansive as others, as possible, to include others if possible, that we're doing this for the benefit of those around us as well. And then as part of preparing the mind, then allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment, not going off into the past and the future. And that's often the case, unfortunately, at the beginning of a meditation. We're already jumping into the future at the beginning in terms of having some sort of expectation about something going to happen or some worry about potentially something happening. So we're already jumping into the future in terms of, I hope this happens, I hope that doesn't happen. So let go of all of those things and simply allow the mind to come to rest in the present moment, to rest in that stillness. And so hence, to settle the mind in a state of relaxation, stillness of the present moment, and the mind clear. This is the optimal point or state to begin the actual meditation session. That's what we're going to do now then. We're going to do a meditation session where we slowly go through each of these 3 steps as part of the preparation, just so we have these points very clear in the meditation. And our meditation sessions in this program will generally be 15 minutes in length. So let's do that practice now, going through these steps in a very slow, methodical way, preparing body, speech, and mind. And then there's one more topic before we go to question and answer. That is the topic of what qualities are we to cultivate in this practice. But first, let's do this meditation. So again, I'll switch off my webcam, not as to distract you during the meditation. Finding a nice, comfortable posture, let's begin. Allowing your awareness to descend into the body. and simply becoming aware of sensations throughout the body. And if you notice any areas of tightness or tension in any part of the body, then use the out breath to relax and release that tightness or tension. And bringing your awareness to the area of your face, and soften and relax all the muscles in the face. The mouth and jaw, soft and relaxed. And all the muscles around the eyes, soft and relaxed. And in this way, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. And relaxing more deeply with each out breath. And as we're relaxing the body, keeping the back nice and straight. And then we can take 3 slow, deep breaths, maintaining awareness of sensations throughout the body as you breathe. And then allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. Not trying to control or regulate the breath in any way. Simply allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And then preparing the mind. And we begin by setting a positive motivation for this meditation. Making the motivation as expansive as possible. And if possible, try to include others in your motivation as well. And then not dwelling in the past, not anticipating the future, simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Releasing all activities of the mind and just rest. Resting in that stillness of the present moment. And thus allowing the mind to remain relaxed, still, and clear. And thus, having prepared body, speech, and mind, we can begin an actual meditation. And here we'll do a very simple meditation, a meditation of simply becoming aware of the sensations of the breath throughout the body. Simply noticing any sensations in the body associated with the breathing. And here the emphasis is of one of relaxation, allowing the body to remain completely relaxed and allowing the mind to remain completely relaxed. While simply noticing sensations in the body. Now, if you get distracted from focusing on the sensations in the body, no need to get upset. In fact, be happy you've noticed you've become distracted. And the very first thing to do is simply relax. And then release the distraction and very gently return to focusing on the sensations within the body. So relax, release, and return. Simply keep coming back to the body again and again, patiently and happily. And we can bring the meditation to a close. One more topic before we go to question answer, and that is, what qualities are we to cultivate in this shamatha practice? And here we begin with a quote from Lama Tsongkhapa from the 14th century, a great Tibetan master who's considered to be the founder of the Geluk school of Tibetan Buddhism. And in his Lam Rim text, in his shamatha section of his text, he says, the concentration that you will accomplish here has two special features. One, a vivid intensity, that is an intense mental clarity. And two, non-discursive stability, that is staying one-pointedly on the object of meditation. And so what we see is this is the classic presentation in the old texts, that in Shamatha practice, there are two qualities to cultivate. Stability, meaning be able to focus single-pointedly on an object without becoming distracted, but also to be able to focus with clarity. So stability and clarity, as we've seen here. Stability is to help us to overcome distraction, and that's often described with the term excitation, and we'll look at that in more detail, I think, in session 3 in this program. And then clarity, to be able to focus very clearly, helps us to overcome what's called laxity, or technical word for dullness. Again, we'll look at that later in this program. But here, as you see, we've added a third quality that you often don't see in those old meditation texts, and that is the quality of relaxation. And this is something very important for us in the modern world, because many of us, due to the lifestyle and society we live in, where we're constantly bombarded by stimulus, our minds tend to be quite agitated and quite stressed and quite chaotic because of the lifestyle and the environment and society we live in the modern world. And because of that, then what we find our habit is that in our life, whenever we want to focus on something, we tense to be able to focus on that, not to get completely distracted. And unfortunately, that sort of works a little bit, that with some tension, we can focus on something. But we know from our own experience is that if we focus on something with a lot of tension for a longer period of time, we become completely exhausted and often become very agitated. So this is not a sustainable method of focus. And unfortunately, this is what happens for many people in the modern world when they come into meditation, because our minds are so chaotic in the modern world we live in, that like what we do in modern day life, when we come into meditation, and let's say we're focusing on the breath, then we apply that tension, because that's what we do in daily life. And that sort of works a bit, and we go, oh, actually, I can focus on the breath, not too bad. But then we get distracted a little bit from the breath, and we think the reason we got distracted is I didn't clamp down hard enough. So we come back and we clamp down even harder. And then, of course, we keep doing that and really getting more and more tense. And then we get completely exhausted from meditating, even to the point where some people say they get headaches from meditating. Well, we're way too tight. We're way too tense. This is not a sustainable method of focus. So therefore, the first thing we need to do in this and any meditation practice is we need to relax, to overcome that tension in the body and the mind. And this is something I can't overemphasize enough, based on my own experience and talking to many, many, many people. We have this habit of tensing, because in our modern world, we tend to oscillate between two extremes. Either we tend to be focused and tense, or we tend to be relaxed and sort of very dreamy and dull and spaced out. So we oscillate between the two. What we want to do here in meditation is combine those two, meaning to be relaxed and completely focused and alert at the same time. And so to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to learn to relax. And it's only on the basis of a relaxed body and mind that we'll be able to develop any sort of sustainable stability. And it's only on the basis of a more stable mind that we can really effectively develop clarity of attention. So we are to cultivate these three qualities in this order. And we see this here from, again, a quote from Attention Revolution, the recommended reading, where Alan Wallace says, "The relationship among these three qualities can be likened to the roots, trunk, and foliage of a tree. As your practice grows, the roots of relaxation go deeper, the trunk of stability gets stronger, and the foliage of vividness or clarity reaches higher." So first thing we need to do is to sink these deep roots of relaxation. If we don't do that, then the trunk of stability and clarity, the tree of shamatha, will completely fall over all the time. Again, I can't overemphasize this point enough. And to really emphasize this point, I'd like to read from the recommended reading, Attention Revolution, from Alan Wallace on page 14. He says the following. He says, thus, our practice of mindfulness of breathing consists of prolonging our awareness of the breath. While this requires an alert mind, such concentration should not be tense, but rather balanced. When we discover that we've become distracted from the meditative object, it may feel natural to clamp down more forcefully, tightly concentrating the mind. You can see this in the facial expressions of people who try to concentrate in this way. Their lips become pursed, their eyebrows draw together, and their foreheads become furled with wrinkles. They're becoming concentrated, but like orange juice, most of the fluidity is being drained from their minds. If you want to concentrate for a short time and don't mind the side effects of tension and fatigue, you can follow the above strategy. But if you want to follow the path of shamatha, you'll need an alternative. I had to discover this fact through experience. During my first extended shamatha retreat, I was filled with enthusiasm. I wanted to take full advantage of the rare opportunity that was before me, for I was meditating in India under the guidance of the Dalai Lama. So I think this was the late 70s, early 80s. He was in a little hut just in the hills above Dharamsala in India, where Dalai Lama was living. I had no financial worries and my material needs were easily met. All I had to do was put the instructions into practice. I threw myself into this training with all my might. Each morning I would rise at 3:30, except once I slept in until 3:45 and got upset with myself for slacking off. Enthusiastic I was, but so uptight. The Tibetan manuals on shamatha meditation that I had studied over the years stated that the type of attention needed when one began such practice was, quote, highly focused. So I tried as hard as I could to keep my mind from wandering. Within a matter of a few weeks, devoting many hours each day to meditation, I could sustain my attention on my chosen object for up to half an hour. I was elated by making such fast progress. As the weeks went by, however, I found myself becoming more and more fatigued. I was draining myself both physically and mentally. My joy in the practice was diminishing accordingly, and I felt my attention was not developing any further. What was wrong? I was trying too hard. The cultivation of shamatha involves balancing the mind, and that includes balancing the effort exerted in the practice with relaxation. I think this points to a cultural difference between traditional Tibetans living in the highlands of Tibet and modern people leading fast-paced lives, their senses constantly bombarded by telephones, email, the media, and noise. Years of such existence conditioned the nervous system and mind in ways that might have been considered torture in rural Tibet. One traditional Tibetan doctor whom I know once commented on people living in the West. So now he's quoting the Tibetan doctor who says, from the perspective of Tibetan medicine, you are all suffering from nervous disorders, but given how ill you are coping remarkably well. So back to Alan Wallace, he says, whether we dwell in Boston, Buenos Aires, Berlin, or Beijing, our minds are conditioned to be more high-strung and engaged in compulsive thinking than the minds of Tibetan nomads and farmers living a century ago. So when Tibetan meditation manuals advise beginners to focus their attention firmly, the instructions are aimed at a very different reader than the average city dweller in the 21st century. Before we can develop attentional stability, we first need to learn to relax. And so again, I can't overemphasize this point enough, based on my own experience and talking to many, many people, that if we want to have an effective shamatha practice, the very first thing we need to do is we need to learn to relax. And I think many of us find it difficult to relax due to the lifestyle we lead. So this may take some time, but it's time well spent for meditation and for our daily life as well, is really just relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, just keep relaxing, relaxing, relaxing. And then once we've established a more relaxed body and mind, then we can work on improving stability of attention. With a more stable mind, then we can work on improving clarity of attention. So this is the order which we are going to work on these qualities in this shamatha practice in the coming weeks. That's all I wanted to discuss in this evening's session. So now we have some time for question answer. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat, or if you prefer, you can put your hand up in the software there, and then you can put on the webcam and mic and ask the question. So maybe I'll ask first Sunny if there's any chat questions.
Yes, from Mary Kata, she says, I got relaxed to the point where my body became heavy feeling. Is this too relaxed? Will it make me dull?
I mean, this is, as I mentioned, this is our tendency now. We tend to be oscillating between two extremes during the day. Either we're alert, either we're tense and focused, or we're relaxed and dull. So what you will probably find is as that you relax in this practice, initially you're going to fall into dullness, because that is our habit, is that when we relax, we just switch off and we go into dullness. That's our mental association with relaxation. So you probably will find that it will take some time to reprogram that mental association, that relaxation doesn't mean switch off, go into some nebulous mode, and so that will take time. That's one point. And secondly, again, due to our more modern lifestyle, what often happens is that we don't have enough time for everything in our life. And so what we tend to do is we cut sleep from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 hours. And then we somehow manage to get by during the day, drinking more coffee and stimulating ourselves, trying to keep ourselves awake. So here in this practice, if we're in that state where we're not getting enough sleep and we sit down and we go to relax, then our body's going, thank you, thank you, thank you. I need to catch up on some sleep. And then we'll get very drowsy and fall into sleepiness. So therefore, that's going to be one of the things I'll mention later again in this program, is that as part of the prerequisites for practice, is that we need to make sure that we're getting enough quality sleep. Because if we're not getting enough quality sleep, then we're just going to fall into dullness and drowsiness. So these are the two main points. Is one, the first, again, it's our habit that when we relax, we become dull. So we just not allow that to happen, just building up a new habit to be able to remain relaxed and alert at the same time, and that will take time. And then secondly, make sure that we're getting enough sleep to meditate effectively. Actually, a couple of other things you may find helpful. One is, if you're meditating in a place that's too warm, your room is too warm, then drowsiness. So make sure you can adjust temperature is one thing. And the other very important thing, which we mentioned in this session in terms of the posture, is to keep the back nice and straight. So if the back is not straight and it's sort of bent over and the head is going down, then yes, we're going to become dull and drowsy. So keeping the back nice and straight. And one actually other point that's important we'll look at later as well is keep the sessions, particularly as a beginner, keep the sessions short. Always emphasizing quality over quantity. Because if we try and meditate too long, then we're not going to be able to sustain it as a beginner. And for the latter part of the meditation, we're simply going to either fall into complete daydreaming, distraction, or complete dullness. So keep sessions short. So there are a few tips or points that you might find helpful in overcoming that dullness.
Question from Richard Einhorn. I'm curious about the visualizations that accompany 9-round breathing. Is there a text that goes into that in detail?
Yeah. The 9-round breathing exercise is something specific within Tibetan Buddhism. And we can do that at many levels, but sort of technically, it's really a practice that we do as preparation within the Vajrayana or Tantra level of practice. And so therefore, in its full form, involving visualizing channels and so forth, it's not something that's generally available, except if you have reached that higher level of practice in Tantra or Vajrayana, you have received an empowerment from a master and you've received a practice, then they would give you instructions on this at that level. So it's not really available. It's not appropriate to mention that really complex visualization, because the visualization is a tantric visualization. But you can do it here at a very simple level, in terms of, for the 9-round breathing exercise, imagine breathing in through one nostril and breathing out through the other for 3, and then switching it across, and then breathing in through both and out through both for the last 3. So that you can do at a very simple level, but the visualization involving channels and so forth is really only sort of appropriate if we are doing already a very high level of tantric practice, because at that level, the 9-round breathing exercise is also not about just sort of settling the coarse mind, but it's also about balancing subtle energies. And we're not really trying to do that here in Shamatha practice. That's not part of the scope of this practice.
From Lisa Malkin, if I keep my eyes open during meditation, should I focus on an object in the room?
Yes, eyes open. We are, Shamatha, like any meditation, is a mental exercise. So even though we have the eyes open, we're not actually looking at anything. However, the reality is that for many of us, particularly I think in the modern world, our visual gaze or our visual faculty tends to dominate. Means if it's open, we're really engaged in the visual. And so then if you open your eyes, you may find that your eyes start looking at all sorts of things. And then of course, we're just distracted because of that. What we can do to help shut down the dominant visual gaze is to have a blank wall in front of us, so there's nothing to catch the visual attention. Or if that's not even working, then meditate in a very dark room, particularly if we get a lot of agitation. Then for me personally, I love to meditate in a completely dark room. I don't really have so much problem falling into dullness. My tendency tends to be more agitation. So actually a completely dark room, there's nothing for the visual gaze to grab hold of, and also less agitation. So that's what you can do. If you find yourself in a situation where you can't make the rooms completely dark and there's not really a blank wall, then as a sort of stopgap measure, you could focus on a particular point in front of you. That's certainly better than the eyes going all over the place, engaging in all sorts of things. But that's not really part of the practice, but that could be a temporary short-term thing to help start to reduce the visual gaze dominating. But eventually you'll need to let go of that and just be in the mental sphere. So I would recommend, if the visual gaze is still dominating, then try the blank wall or a completely dark room. That I find very helpful.
And Pamela Patton, I have such a hard time settling my mind. It helps me to broaden my awareness by listening for noises and sensing a landscape beyond my mind. Is that okay?
Yeah. Again, many of us in the modern world, due to our lifestyle, I mean, really, we're all pretty, at some level, according to Buddhism at least, we're all caught up in obsessive compulsive thinking. I mean, that's just the reality of us living in the modern world. It's just blah, blah, blah all day long. And so therefore, that's one of the reasons in this program, as the object that we're going to use in this program, is we're going to focus on the breath, because that's a physical, tangible object. And that really helps us to get out of the blah, blah, blah mind and into the body, into the present moment. So we'll be using that in this program as the focal point. And that's going to be very helpful for letting go of the blah, blah, blah. But what we need to be careful of, regardless of what object we use for shamatha practice, is we're not trying to block thoughts. That's aversion. So trying to block thoughts is like throwing petrol on the fire. It'll just make more thoughts. So we're not trying to, you know, sometimes people mistakenly think that meditation is about emptying the mind of thoughts. If you've ever tried to empty your mind of thoughts, unless you're sort of taking Valium or something, it doesn't work. So here, we're not trying to empty the mind of thoughts. And even if there's thoughts there, it doesn't matter, because they can be in the background. We just keep focused on the object, and we're going to be using the breath again. So when we talk about, you know, like even preparing the mind, bringing the mind into the present moment, we're not saying block thoughts, get rid of thoughts. All we're simply doing is saying, just bring your attention into the present moment. There's probably going to be a lot of thoughts and things still going on, but just leave them in the background. Don't bring your attention to them at all. In the long term, you'll probably find that even a lot of that background noise, the blah, 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 will settle down and your mind will become still. But that's going to take a long time because we have such a strong habit of blah, blah, blah all day long. So the initial key element is not allow ourselves to just follow the blah, 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 and to just sort of keep letting go of that and come back to whatever we're focusing on. Just keep doing that patiently. It'll take a long time, but the more we can do that, the more you'll find that even though there may be a lot of blah, blah, blah going on, you won't get caught up in it so much. It can still go on in the background there, and in the foreground, you're focusing on the object, be it the breath or whatever the object is. So that's very important. Don't try to get rid of the blah, 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 obsessive compulsive mind. That's not going to work. But we'll talk more about this in the coming sessions when we look at the breath practice. I think we've got time for one more question.
Okay, so I'll combine it. 2 questions about sessions. How long is a short session, and how many sessions should you do in one day?
Right, good question. The general recommendation is always emphasizing quality over quantity, as I mentioned earlier. How short will depend on us as an individual, what capacity we have. You know, a ballpark figure. I mean, we're doing 15 minutes in this program, but that's mainly just to so we get a taste of these practices. But for some of beginners, 15 minutes could be a good amount of time. Other people who maybe have a little bit more experience maybe find that 20, 25, 30 minutes is better, but it's always emphasizing quality over quantity. If you're finding in the latter part of your meditation, you're simply completely caught up in dullness or distraction, then make it shorter. And so maybe just 15 minutes. Well, what we need to realize is that if we only ever meditate 15 minutes, there's only a limited amount of progress that we can make. So start short. Once you get comfortable with that amount of time, and particularly if you're doing 15 minutes and you're finding that even at the end of the session, you're going, oh, I could have done a little bit more, then that's a good time to maybe extend a little bit to maybe 20 minutes and so forth. So slowly extend the amount of time you meditate, depending on your capacity, but always emphasizing quality over quantity. And then how many sessions? Again, if you want to meditate, say a little bit longer in the morning, 45 minutes or so, but you can't sustain it, break it into 2 20-minute sessions with a little break in the middle. Or you can have 1 session in the morning, 1 session in the evening. But again, it's not necessarily more is better, because if we can't sort of sustain it, if we just sit down and we're just allowing ourselves to go completely into daydreaming and dullness, then we're actually increasing the very faults we're trying to decrease in this practice. So again, emphasize quality over quantity, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later in this program. Okay, I think we've run out of time there. Sorry?
Yeah, Glenn, there was also a dedication that one of the members had written to you about. Do you?
Yes.
It's in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I want to do the dedication now, so I'll go to the next screen, and then we can do. It's in the chat, the dedication itself. Where's the dedication?
Hi, Glenn. It's Charlotte. I was
Oh,
asking if you could dedicate for my mother, Constance. It's her 1-year anniversary. And
okay. Do you have a specific dedication or just mention her name?
her name, and that all beings who have
Well,
passed.
actually, why don't you can just do that now, and then we'll add that into the dedication. So Charlotte would like to do a specific dedication, and then we'll on the basis of that, we'll go into a general dedication here.
I just wanted to say that I hope that my mother and all beings who have passed this past year will maybe quickly reborn in a pure realm or have precious human rebirths.
Okay, thank you very much, Charlotte. And then we'll do a general dedication, and we'll do that each session in this program. And I always like to do the dedication from Great Indian Master Shantideva. So I'll read out the dedication. You can just listen, or you can read the words yourself as well, or just contemplate the words. So we're dedicating all of our efforts for this session this evening based on this dedication. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you. So next week, session 2, we'll be focusing on the first variation of the breath practice, mindfulness of breathing, the full body practice, where we'll be really working with the quality of relaxation. We'll also be looking at the objects that we can use in the Shamatha practice. We'll be also looking at the tools, particularly mindfulness and introspection. We'll be looking at those in more detail as well. So this is what's coming up next week. So until then, stay safe, stay well. See you next Tuesday, same time. So bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste.